Lesson 106. Well, in the last lesson, Lesson 105, we learned our very first Spanish infinitive, which is the word comprar, and that means to buy. And we learned that in Spanish, an infinitive is only one word, whereas in English, it takes two words to say an infinitive. And then we talked a little bit about some different endings. We talked about how a Spanish infinitive can end in AR, ER, or IR. And the reason for that is because in Spanish, there are three different conjugations. In Spanish, we have the first conjugation, the second conjugation, and the third conjugation. And a conjugation basically is a pattern of endings. So any verb from the first conjugation is going to have a certain pattern of endings, and then any verb from the second conjugation is going to have yet another specific pattern of endings, and then verbs from the third conjugation, all those verbs will have yet another specific pattern of endings. So we have three conjugations, three different patterns of endings, and every verb belongs to one of these conjugations. Now, the thing that we want to mention here, as far as infinitives go, is that if a verb belongs to the first conjugation, the infinitive will end with the letters AR. And you see a few examples here. Yo compro means I buy, and the infinitive form is comprar. And since it's from the first conjugation, you can see that it ends with AR, comprar. And then you see some other examples there below that, such as hablar, trabajar, and caminar. All of these verbs belong to the first conjugation. And you can tell because the infinitive form ends in AR. Moving one column to the right, we see the second conjugation. And these verbs follow a slightly different pattern of endings. And the thing to remember about verbs from the second conjugation is that the infinitive form of the verb is going to end with ER. And we see examples here like ser, which means to be. And then we see tener, that's the infinitive form of yo tengo, which means I have. So tener is going to mean to have. Next we have querer, comer, beber, and ver. So the point to remember here is that all of these second conjugation verbs, the infinitive form is going to end in ER. And then moving yet another column to the right, we see the third conjugation. Of course, as you can see, we don't really know that many third conjugation verbs yet. Really, we only know one, and that's the verb yo voy. Well, the infinitive form of yo voy is ir, I-R. And I-R, that's what infinitives from the third conjugation end with, is the letters I and R.
In this case, Bill, ir happens to be one full word, but there are going to be other verbs that end in IR. But we don't know any of those yet in this book.
We just don't know them yet.
Yeah.
I guess we'll get there sooner or later.
But the infinitive word of I go, in this case, it just happens to be only those two letters.
Well, it's so short. I mean, it's just a very short word.
Yeah.
So all we get really is just the I and the R.
Yeah, but we want to let the students know that there are other verbs, longer verbs that include those two letters at the end of the word.
So the thing to remember for now is that first conjugation infinitives end with AR, second conjugation infinitives end with ER, and third conjugation infinitives end with IR. Antonio, before we bring this lesson to a close, why don't we take our listeners through each of the different verbs in our chart and help them see how the infinitive form of each verb relates to the forms that they already know. Let's start with the first conjugation. In the first conjugation, the infinitive form of a verb ends with AR. And the first verb that we see is yo compro. That means I buy. But what about the infinitive form, Antonio?
Comprar. That just means to buy. So that would be the infinitive form of yo compro.
Okay, so yo compro means I buy. And comprar means to buy.
Yes.
And next we see yo hablo. Yo hablo means I speak or I talk, right? Mm-hmm. But what about hablar?
Yeah, hablar, that just means to speak. That's the infinitive form.
Okay. Next we have yo trabajo, and that means I work. And then we have the infinitive form. Why don't you tell us about that one?
Which is trabajar. That means to work.
Okay. Next we have yo camino, which means I walk.
But we have the infinitive form, which is caminar, which means to walk.
So for each verb that we know from the first conjugation, now we can see the infinitive form. And again, they all end in AR. Now, let's take a look at these verbs of the second conjugation. The verbs from the second conjugation, the infinitive will end in ER. And Antonio, the very first verb that we see here is one that our listeners are very familiar with at this time, yo soy, but they haven't really seen that infinitive form. Antonio, tell us a little bit about the infinitive form that we see here.
Yeah, the infinitive form would be ser, which means to be. So, yo soy, I am, ser, to be.
So what if I wanted to say something like, I want to be a fireman when I grow up? Could I say, yo quiero ser?
Yes, that is it.
So in Spanish, you might hear someone say, yo quiero ser a fireman when they grow up. Okay, so ser just means to be. Okay, next in our list we have yo tengo, and that means I have.
And the infinitive form would be tener, which means to have.
And of course, tener ends with the letters ER, as any infinitive from the second conjugation will. Next we have yo quiero, which means I want.
And the infinitive form, querer, which means to want.
And again, that ends in ER. The next verb is yo como, which means I eat.
And the infinitive form, comer, which means to eat.
So, Antonio, what if I wanted to say in Spanish, I want to eat a burrito? I could say, yo quiero comer un burrito.
Yeah, that's it, Bill. You got it.
Okay. The next verb we see is yo bebo. That means I drink. What about the infinitive form, Antonio?
Beber, which is to drink.
Okay. So what if I wanted to say in Spanish, I want to drink water? Could I say, yo quiero beber agua?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, good. Well, next we have yo veo, and that means I see.
And the infinitive form would be ver. So ver means to see.
So every infinitive from the second conjugation ends in ER. And then that leaves only the third conjugation. So yo voy, that means I go. And then we have this infinitive form here, ir. Tell us a little bit about that, Antonio.
So ir just means to go. So if I want to say, I want to go, you just say, yo quiero ir. So ir is a verb by itself. In this case, but again, there are other verbs that it's gonna be that verb plus this ending, this ir ending. It's just that so far we're only giving you the examples of the words that you already know.
So if I wanted to go to the beach, I could say yo quiero ir to the beach, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.